Hi, and welcome to Soul and Science, a podcast on uniting Western psychology with Eastern wisdom. My name is Nyana, and I'm a psychotherapist residing in India and in conversation with Ardaas ji, who is an international trainer in yogic wisdom, and he is from Portugal. We invite you to embark on a profound exploration of the human journey with us. We integrate scientific insights into the mind with Eastern wisdom on life's polarities, paradoxes, and boundless nature to uncover a deeper understanding of our existence. Season 1, we begin with the exploration of relationships and the part that leads back to the self. Why relationships? We are constantly engaging in relationships with everything around us, from people to our environment. While we usually focus on relationships between two people, the most profound relationship we have is with ourselves. How many of us are truly aware of this relationship we have? Do we nurture it, trust, love, and respect it? Or are we living in fear and rejection of self, waiting to be validated externally? So join us as we go deep dive into the relationship with our mind, our body, and our spirit. So welcome you to talk about emotions today, and inviting Ardaas ji to just introduce himself to us.
Satnam, hello everyone. I am Ardaas Singh. I live in Portugal. I am originally from Spain. I studied engineering and then I moved on to yoga and I applied my engineering mind to yoga. So I combine left and right hemispheres of the brain to approach yoga. And my parents were yogis, so I was born in a yogic family, even though I was in the West. And yes, we come right straight from our relationship to ourselves. We talked about the mind, we talked our communications and relationship to our words and the relationship to our soul. And we come onto emotions today. And I think it's going to be very appropriate because we in yoga, we sometimes say that the emotions are the language of the soul. The soul speaks through emotions. That's one of the things that we can connect in a way. I mean, I'm just, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, well, not all emotions come from the soul, right? But the soul speaks through emotions as well. So let's say that not all emotions come from there, but the communication that we receive from this hidden essential aspect of ourselves that we are generally feeling disconnected from, the essence or the soul, the Atman, it communicates something through deep, profound, and pure emotions, let's say, which we're gonna maybe throughout today's talk, we're gonna clarify a bit more of what does that mean, because not all emotions come pure by themselves. But maybe first it would be good to clarify what is emotion. So maybe Satseva, I call Nyana Satseva, by the way, so that's her spiritual name. So if you don't mind, I will use that name because that's how we relate in yoga. So Satseva, what are emotions from the psychological perspective?
Okay, so to talk about emotions, I'm going to first just put out there that there is a difference between emotions and feelings. And we kind of use them interchangeably. So I'm going to clarify some of that, including what perceptions are, because when we speak, we are not always speaking consciously. We're speaking mostly, semi-consciously or subconsciously. And so when we talk, we interchange, we use I feel when we're actually talking about something that is not a feeling. So what is a feeling? Let me just start with that. And that essentially a feeling is something that is more of a physical sensation. So you can feel things like hunger or pain, right? And they are more conscious experiences, right? Um, and not, whereas emotions are not always conscious, right? They may have come from the unconscious mind, and they are brought to the surface through uh, and are affected by our thoughts, beliefs, desires, and interpretations, essentially. Yeah, while the emotions are there, there is a base. We have five basic emotions, which is disgust, fear, anger, sadness, and joy. uh, some people also add surprise, which makes it 6. But essentially, what we see is that we operate within these 5, and then there are some more complex emotions such as grief, shame, guilt, which is the merging of one or more emotions, right? So these are labeled, and these are emotions, and emotions and feeling. The main difference is that feelings are more conscious, whereas emotions are predominantly more unconscious and have like a sort of it comes with an interpretation on its own. They exist, like you said, they're part, they may be from they give us information about ourselves in its natural state. But when we begin to talk about emotions and feeling in conversation in relationship to another, that sort of changes from what we see in psychology, wherein we start saying, I feel sad because that person betrayed me, and I'm feeling sad not because the person betrayed me. That's an interpretation that is making me sad, right? Or a perception that the person is doing something to me which is making me sad. Whereas in what we see, the event or
Which
experience,
is the
we can essentially look at emotions as a response, which is subjective. So different people will respond or have emotions that look different to different situations. It does have a physiological response, and there will be a behavioral response as well. So sometimes, just I'm not saying that everybody will respond to sadness in the same way, but sadness may have a behavioral response of tears, for example, right? It has a physiological experience of maybe something that happens in our chest, or our body language changes. Um, and therefore, emotions, feelings are different, and they are here to give us some information that's telling us something. Emotions are pretty much the same across humanity. We all kind of feel the same kind of emotions. We may just feel them differently for different things, but we all have the same emotions. And yet we may respond to each situation with different emotions. How does
yeah.
that?
Even beyond humanity, right? As far as I understand, these 5 or 6 basic emotions that you mentioned, they are considered the basic emotions because we can identify them in animals as well. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yes,
You
and
can you
they've been with us in our limbic system. That's where a lot of our emotional responses come from, is because that was pretty much the mammalian brain, parts of the brain, and they are there for survival. And emotions are about helping us survive. If and that the more we are expressing them in a healthy way, the better it is for our emotional well-being and physical well-being.
So one thing that would be very useful is to understand is that we copy each other's faces. There's a big part of the brain that is designed to copy the face of somebody else, no? And I think for babies, it is useful to learn language and other skills, including reading emotions. And that's why if you look at a surprised dog, will have similar facial expression as a surprised human, lifting the eyebrows and maybe opening the mouth and so on. So that's biologically, it has been designed already in our brain so that we can, learn. But that also has consequences. So when we see somebody with a particular facial expression, a part of our brain wants to copy that. And so part of ourselves want to mimic what they are doing with their face. And that's kind of like the beginnings of what empathy would be, like to begin to feel what they are feeling, because I'm copying their face, or I'm remembering how it feels to have that face within me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we call that the mirror neurons, and the theory of mind, it's two neuroscience, but essentially mirror neurons is when the baby gets that feedback. So when I'm smiling and you smile back at me, then that's where connection begins. Is when I'm seeing an equal response and I'm being responded to. And then it brings about another joy in me when the baby, and that's how two people communicate essentially through facial expressions. And like you said, about facial expressions, that is wired in that facial expressions are universal, right? They're pretty much the same, and that by just looking at facial expression, the brain registers, oh, that is the emotion, and that is what the person is feeling, and that kind of goes into theory of mind. But that's a little bit too maybe scientific for this here. But like you said, it's the beginning of empathy, feeling into what somebody else is.
Right. All right. So that will be empathy, and that will be a topic we will cover today. But before we go into that, let me then give the yogic approach to emotions. Yeah, since you gave us an introduction on how you would define it from a psychological standpoint. So, I mean, we play with the words, and first of all, emotion, we say is emotion, energy in motion, and energy flows. And, when we come into yogic philosophy, we often go to the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and so on. So the flow is the language of water. So we would say that emotions flow like water. And there is a certain quality of emotion that is linked, as I say, energy in motion. So that energy has to flow, has to be in motion. So emotions, what happens with emotions is that they may be stuck in some way. We'll talk about the problems with emotions in a moment. But if we would translate that to the language of water, what happens when the water gets stuck? Well, when the water is still, it starts to accumulate parasites, toxins, insects, and all sort of things that may make it toxic as well.
Mm.
And if we consider that emotions are like water, there is no problem with water. There's never a problem with water. It's just what the water carries, right? Is the water maybe carrying some toxin, or maybe by itself being accumulated, maybe a breeding ground for all these parasites or whatever it is. So it's not the motion itself that is any problem, is what the motion can be carrying. So that's that concept, that's a metaphor that can help us. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I like your differentiation between feeling and emotion. And we do the same. We also talk about this difference. We talk about it slightly different, more adapted to us as a yogic, with our yogic understanding of the body. So the sense of feeling, like we have five senses and we have five elements. So out of the five senses, the sense of touch, feeling, touch, is associated to the heart.
Mm.
And the heart, we say that this is a neutral space. The heart is neutral. It doesn't have like preferences, let's say. Yeah, the ego has preferences. The ego says, I like this, I dislike this. And I don't know if we talked about this when we were talking on the first, but we were, no, well, one of the things about the ego is it starts like a baby saying, okay, I'm curious about this. I want to get attracted to understand more about this, which is similar to the mirror neurons. The mirror neurons is copying something. So when the baby sees something attractive, he wants to get closer. So feeling closer. And when it's something scary, it will pull away. Basic survival mechanism, and that's going to help the baby stay alive. And if it pulls away, it's going to trigger a very basic emotion of disgust, probably, yeah. And you're going to see it in the face. And if it's going to be closer, you're going to see maybe curiosity or joy in the face of the baby, and it will get so towards or away from.
Mm.
Now, and that we say that towards or away from, in a very, very primal state in the baby, as the baby is growing the ego through, the first 3.5 years up to 7 years, that ego, that towards or against or away from becomes I like, I dislike.
Mm.
And those likes and dislikes, which are colored by our past experiences, if you have a good experience with a little puppy, you're going to like dogs. And if you have a bad experience with a puppy or with a dog, you're going to dislike dogs and maybe other animals too. So that ego gets colored, and then it transforms our perception of the world later on, and how we're going to approach an animal in the future. So, and that's going to be also triggering a number of emotions, because I see a dog, I'm going to feel the fear and the shock or whatever, all these things. But likes and dislikes is something of the ego. The heart by itself, it's just a neutral space. So when we are talking about the sense of touch, primarily, this is a neutral thing. So let's say, as I feel somebody touching my arm. Well, the first thing that you feel, the conscious feeling that you are talking about, you said emotions are more from the unconscious or what we call subconscious, let's say. But yeah, but before that triggers, consciously you just feel somebody touching you, and that's just a feeling, just a sensation, a physical sensation. Now that comes into your heart, and the thing is, very, very, very quickly, we go from the feeling down to the emotion. When I say down, I point down, even though you don't see here, but down towards my belly. So we say that the realm of emotions is the realm of the abdomen below the diaphragm. And so, and an emotion can flow again in through the body. So some emotions will go up and towards the extremities, or other ones will go down, depending on what kind of emotion we are feeling. But the central space, the reign of the emotions, is the belly, the abdomen.
Mm.
So the first touch, somebody's touching my shoulder, I feel it in my heart, that's coming down into my belly very, very quickly. So any feeling very quickly can become, and when I say emotion, you would say an emotional reaction. So for example, somebody touches me, the first thing is just a feeling, somebody's touching me, and then I notice, oh, that's my mother. And then immediately that's going to trigger some joy, some pleasure, some happiness that I am with a beloved person. If I that the first thing was feeling, but then very quickly transformed. If I notice the touch of the shoulder, and then I notice is some drunk guy in the street who is asking for money or whatever, is like, why is he touching me? And there is all this internal emotional reaction
Yeah.
to that touch. So the feeling itself is neutral, and that happens in the heart. And the moment that it goes down, then it becomes an emotional reaction.
Mm.
And this differentiation becomes very blurred, because we may love someone, and especially during the first stage of falling in love with somebody, we feel a lot of qualities that are associated to the heart. The heart is opening, we want to touch them, we want to hug them, we want to embrace them, be close to us, we, heart to heart, we want all these things that are so beautiful and joyful associated to the heart. And and that's neutral in a way. Yeah, that kind of expression of love that is happening from the heart can be neutral in a way. But how quickly do we have some experience that maybe they say something we dislike, and immediately that's going to go down, and it's going to go more into our belly, and we're going to feel, ooh, some uncomfort, in, like a knot in the stomach, and it's like, ooh, I didn't like what she said, but okay, it's just, it's my beloved, so I will ignore it, right? And especially during the first phase, when somebody's falling in love, then we are very um, we tend to ignore a lot of things, yeah, because we are in this uh, state that is half neutral but also like a fantasy. So we have to be careful with everything that we perceive in that stage as well. But let's say, as time goes on, very quickly, whenever that person touches us, is going to start triggering all those emotions that are being ignored before, that were before being ignored. And then eventually, when you go over the stage of the falling in love with somebody, then you're just with that person. And then when somebody says I love you, what does that mean? Is that really love? And is that like a neutral feeling in the heart? Is like something like a joy expanding in the heart? Or is that like I need you, I'm depending on you, I have if you go away from my life, I'm gonna be desperate, I'm gonna feel desolate, and I will not know what to do with myself. And all those things are emotional reactions. So, and yet we call it love as well. So when we say I love somebody, we have conditions. And that's a clue that gives us that when you have conditions of something, is not a neutral feeling anymore. This is an emotional aspect that we are talking about. So if one some truly loves somebody, then you love them no matter what.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that's easy. I'm just saying this is the quality of love as the ultimate experience. That's I just love, I just love. And there's no conditions. I love you if, yeah. So the closest thing to this is like parents with their children. That's the closest thing that we have. And you can say, well, if my baby says something, I'm changing the nappies of my baby, and my baby that's poo in the moment that I'm changing the baby, and the poo goes all over my hands. And I'm gonna be, oh, be cute little baby, you poo on my hands. Come on, what are you doing? Right? And we just love them even more, right? And it's very easy because in yoga we talk about love, and people approach love in a very particular way, and then they say, I can love anyone, but how real is that love? How neutral it is, and how unconditional it is, right? Because if you are sitting on a bench, and it's very easy to say, I love everyone. But then again, this idea of a drunk guy who just comes and sits in a bench next to you, and you're like, oh, well, I love everyone, also the drunk guy, right? So I have to include him in this love. And then this drunk guy pees himself, and the pee goes through the bench all over to your trousers, and suddenly you are like drenched in pee. Your reaction is probably not going to be like when your baby pees, yeah, or poos when you are changing the baby. And so we have conditions, and if we don't have conditions, that's the closest we can get to a neutral, purely clean state of love. Now, I don't know how I went from emotions to love directly, but it's good to identify this difference of what's happening in the heart and what's happening below the diaphragm. And we also say that the diaphragm is like a gateway, and there's lots of emotional challenges and blockages are stored in the diaphragm. So when somebody suffers some form of trauma, it will get stored over there as well. And therefore you can, because the diaphragm controls the breathing, you will see it in the breathing. So by noticing how somebody breathes, you can identify a lot of the emotional blockages. Oh,
Um,
okay.
no, I think it's I don't know if we can really talk about emotions without really talking about love and its neutrality. Because like you said, love is energy in motion and energy has charge, whereas love is neutral. And a lot of times I hear clients that, no, 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 I'm not saying it from any place of any anger. And you can hear the charge, you can feel the charge, you can see the facial expression. But I'm saying, no, but I'm not angry. But, and I'm like, no, if there was love and neutrality in this, there would be no charge.
He should be more considerate, or he should be, like
Yeah.
whenever there's conditions, then there is a sign that there is no neutrality there.
There is no neutrality, and that if you're coming from a neutral space, it's open hearted, it's welcoming, it's compassionate. Whereas emotions will always have a charge. And if you're in a charge, that also helps you understand that there is an emotion present. And that's helpful because there's so many things that you said so brilliantly that stood for me, that when we do sessions with clients and we say, where do you feel the sadness? Then they point at the chest, or they feel it in their belly, or they feel it somewhere in the body, right? And yet they'll say, I think I feel. And I'm like, that's really funny, because emotions are not necessarily in the mind, they are sensations in the body. And then when we, like you said, when we ignore them, what happens is that they get stuck. And then what happens to those stuck emotions, like trauma, which is what it is. That's what we work so much with, is these emotions that haven't been processed and haven't moved for years because they didn't have a full expression, and they didn't have a full.
Before we talk about that, about what happens when they get stuck and trauma, let's just say one thing: emotions are not bad.
Mm,
Okay, because so far we just identified that they are not neutral.
mm,
But it's fine. I'm not saying they are a problem necessarily. Yeah. Again, emotion is just energy in motion. So energy is natural, and it's good that this natural thing of energy flows through the body. And as long as we are humans, it's natural that there's going to be emotions flowing through the body. So just to clarify before we go into describing the problems of emotions being blocked, some fantasy that often I notice in the spiritual path is that a yogi or somebody who achieves some sort of, I don't know what they expect, enlightenment or spiritual achievement, is somebody who is beyond emotions.
mm.
And no, that would be a very cold person. If we think of somebody who has no emotions, that was probably very cold, distant, and probably apathetic, which is complete opposite of empathy. right? Apathy. So that's completely on the other side. Like I'm not gonna feel any emotion. And you can see that many yogis with this stone face, very calm, very clear, and you can tell them some tragic experience that you've had, and they are gonna be very calm and gonna tell you what the philosophy of Buddha says or whatever. And you're like, are you even human? Are you feeling what I'm saying? Right. So and the thing is, a saint will be calm, and a saint may hear your words and be able to give something wise back to you. And maybe your words will not disturb the peace in them, but that's because of their capacity to bring all this pain into this some sort of infinite compassion, and this pain of, you have a little bucket of pain. If I'm talking about water, right? You have your bucket of water tainted with pain, and they are connected to some infinite ocean of compassion. And then this bucket of pain into the ocean disappears and just becomes dissolved. So pain gets dissolved. Modern problems being resolved get dissolved, and then the saint will be peaceful, and they may feel the emotion as well because they are empathetic. So you tell them that they feel your emotion, it will go through themselves and go into this infinite ocean of compassion, and then give something down, download something down from there, or just be compassionate. The problem is when somebody, it, you know, the mind is extremely powerful. The mind may make you believe that you have reached that level of saintlyhood, and then you pretend to be in this peaceful state, and maybe you are in a certain kind of peacefulness, the peacefulness of the apathetic, the one who is like a stone, nothing touches me, nothing is going to touch me, so I don't care. Now that's not non-attachment. What, we would learn from Buddhist teachings, for example, non-attachment, that's detachment, and detachment from one of the most human things, which is emotions. So just to clarify before we go on, there's nothing wrong with emotions themselves, and it's good that we feel and experience and express emotions. But yeah, sometimes they will get stuck, and then we go into what you were going to say. Sorry for the little break, but I thought it was important to mention that.
I think that's such an important thing to spend maybe a little bit more time on the importance of emotions, and that we all are running away from emotions and we want to deny that emotions exist. And sometimes growing up, we are giving messages that being angry is not okay. Good children don't get angry, or you shouldn't be expressing anger, you shouldn't be expressing sadness. There's almost this quest for everyone has to be happy all the time, and there isn't space to hold space for each other's emotions and pain, actually. And that it's such a natural aspect of being human, and that what would life be if there were no emotions and the
Right.
expression. um, and I think where we get uh, afraid of is reactive emotions, like you said, that we then take on, and then we get the connection between two people gets disconnected, or then we get disconnected from ourselves. But in essence, emotions is what makes us alive.
They come with a life.
Yeah.
The very fact that we are alive is going to be connected to emotions, because life is, there's going to be energy flowing, and with the energy there's going to be emotion, that's going to be linked together.
Yeah. And so even before we go into what gets stuck, or whether, depending on how you feel about it, is that emotions also convey to each other and develop connection. That we need emotion to connect, and that when we are detached, as you said, or disconnected, then we're not connecting. And by design, that's what we are here. We are here. We are interconnected beings. We're all connected. But then, because of, like you said, past experiences, there are perceptions and interpretations of emotions or experiences, and then we are afraid of them. We almost become afraid of emotions, or that we've got the messaging that it's not okay to have those emotions, especially anger, for example, in its expression of it, and that there are healthy ways of expressing the same thing, and that most of us have probably seen an unhealthy um, uh, reaction or response in a particular environment or event, and therefore say, okay, no, 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 I don't want to be an angry person, like labeling those things. um and yet anger has its is very important, and sadness is very important. They are also, like earlier, like you said, they give survival messages, and they are the language of the soul, like you said. Can you share a little bit more about what you mean about that, to fully encompass what that means, and the importance of emotions that we can sit and observe and find safety in feeling?
So let's put an example on how the emotion can be a message from the soul. And since you mentioned anger, I will put anger as an example. And and a boy is in school, and he's told that he should be a good boy. And a good boy is the one who shuts up, does his homework, doesn't create problems, studies hard, gets good marks. And that's a good boy. And so he shuts up, he's in silence, he's working hard, he's learning what the teacher is saying. And then he notices that the teacher doesn't pay any attention to him. She is the adult in the class, yeah? She's paying attention to all those who are creating disturbances in the class, all those who are making noise and laughing and joking. And they are the cool kids. And suddenly that is, well, I'm not cool somehow, you know, just by being a good boy. Okay, that's one thing. Then he notices, okay, so the teacher who I'm trying to impress in a way, because we try to, we want the approval of the adults in our circle. So we are trying to impress our teachers, and they are not paying any attention to us because we don't need it, because he's studying very well. So don't worry about him. He's gonna make it. So that's one thing. Second thing, I attract the wrong kind of attention because the cool kids, who could be the troubling kids, they don't like you getting good marks and being so studious and so on. So they start bullying you. And these kids is like, wait a moment. So I'm told that I have to be a good kid, but by being a good kid, the other kids are hitting me, they're insulting me, they are kicking me, they are bullying me, and I'm feeling no love. And my adults, the teacher is happy that I am silent because I don't cause any trouble, but she doesn't give me any energy, which means doesn't give me any love. So by doing what the adults are telling me I have to do, I get less love and more punishment for that. And that doesn't make any sense as a child. So the internal reaction is anger. Now, if you are a good child, you are not supposed to express the anger. So I'm trying to take what you were saying, right? Don't express the anger and say, okay, I will be a good child because the instruction is very strong. I will not express the anger. But then what happens? The anger goes internally and it goes against myself. And I repress that anger as well. Well, the anger is just a message. Something in you feels very wrong. Actually, something in this kind of society and this example that I just gave is very wrong. No more than one thing probably are very wrong in that image. But that's a very classical image. I would say that's a very common scenario that you can imagine in any culture, right? Or you can imagine a similar example. And the soul that feels completely trapped by this culture telling the boy what it is that he has to be a good boy. And if you are a good boy, you're going to be loved. And there's so many wrong things in this statement, and the soul feeling trapped. And there's just this anger is the emotion that comes out of that. So that anger is actually a good communication from the soul that something is very wrong. And if you can repress it, and then it will become like passive aggression, and that's going to be manifesting later on in a number of ways. Or you can express it and be angry, and then they will say, why are you angry? You always have good marks, you are always the good kid, why are you you have no right to be angry. So even if this boy expresses the anger, he's going to be maybe bullied even more, because like he has no right to feel angry. He's the good one, he's the one who is always on the top of the class or whatever. So there is an example on how, at least for the child, and if any adult was conscious around would notice that this child is holding anger. And this anger is something that is healthy in that case. It's telling us a message. And it should tell, it's definitely telling him a message, but he doesn't understand it. And it should tell us that something is wrong. And then can we deal with it? Can we help him deal with that? And can we maybe make adjustments so that we can find back to a healthy state? No?
Yeah. That's such a beautiful example because, like you said, it's such a common example today that kids experience, especially the conditions on being good. And that if you do, and then you will get love, and then when I don't receive it, there is natural anger, and that anger uh, is about injustice or something that is wrong, and your soul is saying this is not making sense, yeah, or um, and that's the nature of emotions, to tell us, the soul telling us, hey, something is not okay, bring your attention to this, including pain, like we talked about last time, is you
Right.
need to bring your attention to this. And instead of actually sitting with that emotion or understanding the child's anger or why the behavior is the way it is, we're being asked to suppress that emotion, suppress the expression of this energy that needs to be expressed. And I remember in the yogic class, you had mentioned that everything that needs to be have a discharge, and therefore we have excreta and urine and things like that need to be discharged of the body so that the body can remain healthy, and that the energies can continue to flow, and the body takes in what it needs and discards what it doesn't.
I wouldn't make the jump to say that every emotion has to be expressed.
Ah.
Even if everything has to be, even if everything like has a flow, everything comes in and comes out in a way. From the yogic perspective, there is two paths to any emotion.
Mm.
Either it has to be contained or expressed, because and it's energy in motion, and in motion would mean that it has to flow somewhere, but there is appropriate expressions of emotions and inappropriate expressions of emotion. If I was alone in the world, I could do whatever I wanted with my emotions, but we live in society, and you cannot just in the middle of the train go and express your emotions just because you feel an emotion and you have to express it. That's going to create a lot of troubles. If you want to be a healthy individual, and I'm not saying that the society has to be happy with you, but I'm saying if you want to be a successful individual who can operate in the world, in society, you have to understand the rules of society as well, and being able to play by the rules, but without being a slave to the rules or a slave to society. So part of what emotional maturity means from a yogic perspective is, first of all, consciousness, because you said at the beginning, emotion is something that happens from the subconscious. So I'm not generally conscious of that. So we first of all we need to become aware of what's happening. Otherwise, we don't know how to deal with it. The example of the child who has passive aggression, he very often he will not know that he's angry. He
Mm.
will have passive aggression, so he's not expressing it. But there is this fire within, and it's burning in the inside, and it's never coming out. So this is an example of an emotion that is being contained, which should be expressed.
Mm.
And there are emotions which are expressed outwardly, which should be contained. So those kids in the class who were creating a lot of noise and so on, they were trying to grab the attention of the others to feel validated. And the only way they knew how to do it is by shouting and by making jokes. And it worked for them because they get attention, and they translate in their mind attention equals love. And that's a very low substitute for what they should get anyway. They should get that love and attention anyway without needing to resort to these mechanisms. So by not getting it, then they start expressing all these emotions in this colorful way, and they get what they wanted, attention. But that's an emotion that is expressed when it should be contained. So the emotion should be either contained or expressed. And most of the time we get into trouble when we express what should be contained and when we contain what should be expressed. So in the case of the boy who is feeling that anger, for example, he should express that anger, but in the right context as well. In the middle of the class, expressing the anger is not going to help. They're going to make more fun of him. The teacher's not going to understand. You are one of the good boys. Why are you angry? And the other boys are like, oh, he's crying. He's not. Yeah, because he's going to be shouting and crying and doing a big mess. But hopefully he can get home and have some safe space at home, right? Where he can express what he's feeling and be heard by an adult and help him to process that. And until he can express it in a healthy way and discharge, which is what you were suggesting, the discharge, he should learn to contain and that takes emotional maturity, and that's not easy, especially for children, but even for some adults as well, right? But there should be a learning on how can I contain what is happening until it's the right moment to discharge it. And even that discharge, what does that mean? We say it could be either you let it go and you fully discharge it and you just absolutely let it go. And you can do that also through breathing, because the diaphragm being so connected to the emotion, there is a number of breaths, particular types of breath that you can do and can be useful to discharge that emotion that has been contained. Yeah, but it needs to be discharged, but not necessarily expressed, because it's not that there's no right environment to express it. So, okay, can I process it and discharge it through the breath? That's one possibility. I can laugh out loud. Laughing is great to discharge emotions which need to be expressed and they haven't. And sometimes we laugh nervously when we have some emotion that we don't know how to express it. So we do this in conversation very often. When we disagree with somebody, we have this nervous laughter because there is some emotion that is like wants to come out. We don't know how to do it, so we kind of laugh. But if you actually utilize laughter and you are in the right environment or by yourself and laugh, you can discharge a lot of even other emotions, not joy, but even anger and other emotions can be discharged through the laughter or actual expression of the emotion. Be angry and express it, but to bring it to the surface of awareness and process it, not just to be angry. I believe, I don't know if I read somewhere, maybe you will confirm it or not, that there was some in the 70s, I think there was this primal therapy where you would take a cushion and start beating the cushion and think, this is my dad, and I'm hitting your dad, and so on. And I think it was proof that it didn't help at all, right? That it was creating even more problems or making it even stronger. Is that correct? That's how I remember it, but I'm not sure.
So it's evolved over time, wherein there is merit in the discharge using that methodology, but to focus more on what is the interpretation and the belief that's linked to that emotion, and how far back does it go. It could be an older anger that hasn't been fully expressed and suppressed, and that while there may be the need, so you stay with the body and you look at what the body's need of expression at that point of time was. It could have been punching, and that you allow the movement of the body so the body feels what it needed to discharge in that way has been expressed in a safe, contained way. So that brings me actually to everything that you said in containment and expression with emotional intelligence, language, and regulation,
Go
right?
go on, shoot.
That is what emotional maturity essentially is, which kids don't necessarily have because they still need another human to co-regulate. So neuroscience and now what they found is that human beings co-regulate each other. So if I am scared and you come to me and I'm calm, it's my nervous system that calms your nervous system through voice and all of those sort of things. And they've gotten into polyvagal and neuroception and all of those sort of things. Yeah, that the nervous system, and therefore when you lift a baby when they are crying and we soothe them, it's our nervous system that's soothing their nervous system, because that's what's happening with emotions, is that it's activating the nervous system. You're going into flight, fight, freeze. And to let the baby know that they are safe, because that's what emotions are. They come from the part of the brain that is about survival. Right. And that's when evolution comes in. And so we teach children how to emotionally regulate. We teach them through our nervous system. So even if they're screaming, we teach them to observe and say, okay, what are you feeling? What is the name of this emotion? It's anger. Anger is okay. What would anger like to say? Anger would like to say, that is not fair. Okay. That's what anger would like to say. So what the work of Dan Siegel is that when you label the emotion, you immediately almost release it. Because the body needs to know what it's feeling, and when you have language to the emotion, the body knows, okay, I'm not going to die. There's no big bear standing here waiting to eat me, or there isn't somebody threatening to kill me or something like that. I'm safe. But whatever this anger, for example, is an expression of what has happened in this government, that this is not fair. I did not like what happened, or I did not like how I was spoken to. And that we allow children and adults to first understand the emotion, label it, express it in a way that's contained, where it can be understood that this is what's happening for me, and then get regulated. And that's the whole thing around emotional intelligence, because otherwise, like you said, and we shared earlier, that it comes up and then we're just screaming at everybody. And that's where that pause between the emotional rise and the response has not been that, which is called the window of tolerance. So
It's called what?
the window of tolerance, of the pause, of the ability to observe, okay, my body is now experiencing a rise of anger, and that I can say I feel angry in this moment, and I can still verbalize and express that without fully screaming. And I say, I wish I could just scream right now, because that's me understanding emotionally intelligently what is somatically happening for my body. And then if it's verbalized, then sometimes anger is a front for fear, and fear, it's, oh, actually I'm not even feeling angry, I'm feeling sad and fearful. And that is what the whole journey of today we are seeing, emotional intelligence and emotional maturity, to have these components of
If I may just bring something, as you were speaking, well, if somebody's hearing us, they cannot see you, but you were bringing the hands to your heart quite often when you were talking about becoming conscious of the emotion that they are feeling. So that's very interesting, because in the body we also associate the lower part of the body with the subconscious or unconscious, and the higher part with the conscious. So when you go above the diaphragm is when you gain consciousness. I mean, we breathe consciously in yoga, so the heart and the lungs are the region of consciousness. So when we are experiencing emotions that they are taking over us, it's happening in the abdomen. And the moment when you said, well, first of all, can I recognize that I'm feeling angry? And you were bringing your hands to your heart. That's an expression of I'm becoming conscious, and that becoming conscious is already bringing the energy up into the heart. And because the heart is such a neutral space, you can from the heart perceive the emotion and neutralize the charge of the emotion, and it doesn't take over. If we don't go into the heart and we stay in the abdomen, and then that emotional reaction can be kind of like an explosion and so on. But this is interesting, the way you were describing the process of what to do with the emotion, and first of all being aware of it, that's like raising the energy towards the heart and neutralizing it there. So
Thank you for adding that, because I wouldn't have fully understood. I just knew that we were observing the emotion and giving it space to not feel like it can't be expressed, but to be able to stay with it in safety. And coming back to bringing my hands up here to consciously then say, do I need to express it? And so then there is choice suddenly
correct.
from what, and we're introducing choice, which that is what emotional maturity really is, right? That I can
And that's the thing, choice can only happen with consciousness,
express.
because otherwise you've not choice, is reaction. So that's the thing, when you are racing to the heart, you are opening the lungs, you are breathing. Breathing is consciousness. Consciousness gives you choice. So if you don't race to the heart, there is no choice. You're just going to stay in that emotion.
Absolutely. And then that happens over and over again. And then relationships become difficult to be with, and emotions become difficult to be with. And that's when we start probably disconnecting and repressing emotions. Because the reaction is not fully either healthy or safe, possibly, or I'm not and so I start repressing it. And that's where trauma begins.
So
And
can I ask then, because you deal a lot with trauma and people who have gone through trauma, and they are there, they are trapped in the emotion that has been suppressed and is happening, and they come to your therapy, and then there's probably a whole process of learning that you have to go through with them. First of all, recognizing what's happening and becoming aware of it. That's the bringing to the consciousness. And then also learning how to process that emotion and how to maybe discharge it, or how to express it, or how to transform it in some way. So which is the hardest step, and how do you go from one step to the next? Which tools do you use from psychology to move along this process?
So I'm trained specifically in a modality called compassionate inquiry and IFS. So by design, using compassion means that compassion comes into the room and there is a whole conversation about the true self, or the soul, as we call it. And we begin to bring the client's awareness to what is the sensations in the body, and then start labeling emotion. And it's really funny because what is the hardest? I think it's labeling emotion, because when I ask people what's there, I feel that I feel heavy, and then they go into a narrative versus being able to label that emotion. I don't know what I'm feeling. It's just heavy. And so a lot of times, because I've repressed it for so long, I haven't had emotional language for so long, I'm not fully able to label what that is. And that
I
I've
can imagine they also go into memories, right? I
absolutely.
feel like it was because she that did that to me, and you're like, no, no, that's your story behind. But what is the feeling? No, not the thing that is
Yes, absolutely. Or they'll
right,
say, I feel like that person doesn't like me, but that's not a
right, right.
emotion. That is a perception. And that I really love, because that was one of the biggest eye openers much long when I started is okay, but most of us go into this, I feel they don't like me. No, that's the perception.
That's not a feeling.
That's
That's
not,
not a feeling.
that
Right.
is the emotion.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the emotion. And then I say there are five basic emotions.
I would even say that's not even an emotion. There is an emotion associated to that, but the other one doesn't like me. That's a thought that
That's a
is
perception.
linked to an emotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And it's that perception
Mm,
or uh, belief that
correct,
nobody likes me, that's giving me that emotion. So when we
correct.
go into the emotion, that's what we look at. We said, okay, fine, if the emotion, and then give them five or six, the five, six different emotions, basic. And I say there are complex, like grief, guilt, and shame. Does this, and then they go, okay, I think it is sadness. And the sadness is because nobody loves her. And I said, okay, so the sadness is because she believes and perceives. So there's a belief there that nobody loves us. So how far back does that go? And that's the process of compassion inquiry, to figure out when did this belief start for the person, how long every time that you perceive it to be that an old wound gets. And that's what trauma is. It comes from the word wound, that there is an old wound that is being touched upon, and that you work with the belief and transform that belief. And if that belief, it can be is transformed, which we some beliefs stick more than others. Then that's when the client starts to have openings in, and then they start saying, oh, I'm breathing differently, or I suddenly feel this expansion in my chest, and there's openness, and what are the possibilities without this belief?
That's you just touched upon something really, really nice, which is that as they transform the thought, something changes in the body, like for example, the breath. So let me just give an example that we sometimes utilize in yoga. That is, maybe the other person is going through this the same process like you are describing, but instead of with a psychologist, they are with a yogi, so they are there and they are describing how they are trapped in this feeling and this belief that comes with this feeling, or let's say this feeling comes from this belief that nobody loves them. And then you could go in the direction of how would you breathe if you were loved,
Mm,
right? And by making them try to imagine how would it feel to be loved, they have to create it in their body, and their breathing is going to change, and that breath is already going to bring self-love, really, basically. But
mm,
that's by asking them to imagine how would it be if they were not trapped in the past.
mm,
It's already creating possibilities to open the future, because sometimes we are so caught up in the past that we see no way on. And you know what, some people really didn't feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
And not just they didn't feel love, maybe they didn't receive love. Maybe they really had a horrible childhood, horrible experiences in their childhood. And you cannot say, well, that's how you imagine. I'm sure your mother loved you. Well, don't be so sure. You don't know how that person's experience was. So, okay, at some point, even if you just go to the past and identify where did it all start, maybe you find there's nothing to you cannot you cannot change that. Yeah, right? That's the past. The past is already done. There's no way to change the past. We can only change how we feel about the past and face the future. But sometimes we are so caught up in the past that we cannot even turn towards the future. So just imagining for yourself, how would somebody breathe if they were feeling that if we are talking about feeling appreciated or feeling loved or feeling recognized or feeling whatever they need, then it's already going to start bringing change. And then they can practice that breath for 40 days and see how that changes in them. And amazing, sometimes we don't even need to go to the story and reframe and rewrite the story, because that's going to be like a torment, and that's going to be like self-punishment. And maybe they've already done enough of that. Maybe they've done a lot of self-psychoanalysis, no? Psychoanalysis. So sometimes just changing the breath can have a tremendous impact.
Yeah, so I don't uh, believe that we go into the story anymore or into the narrative. It's about
Mm.
validating the feeling or the
Right,
emotion. Because
right,
most of us want to feel validated in our emotion, in our pain, that it was hard, right?
right.
Uh, and that's validated. More, that's the only experience that when I can feel my emotion that felt so scary back then with compassion, and just acknowledge that, yeah, that's sad. There was sadness there. And yes, the sadness did not get acknowledged. Can be very, very like just, yeah, thank you. Yes, that's all I needed to really experience, is that I'm not crazy. It's not that, I'm just feeling all this pain because there wasn't any. Right. And a lot of people, for a lot of people, that's such a big and important experience with emotions, and therefore emotions become from giving life become deadened almost, and people are living without that experience of emotions because it's just too many emotions and too much, and I don't know how to regulate it and navigate it, and then I just bottle it up and keep it somewhere and hope that
Mm.
I don't have to feel it. And the beauty of life is there will be always experiences that will invite you to come back to the soul, or come back to your innocence, or come back to the path of feeling that you are whole and complete and loved, and that these emotions are valid, and you've been carrying them to get some semblance of acknowledgement for them, right? But what would be, because I know that at least in psychology today and in science, these repressed emotions can have quite a lot of effects when not expressed, and they're suppressed both on the body as well as the mind, including illnesses. Um,
Right.
so, what would to invite what is we I've shared about largely about the repressed emotion psychology and trauma, and how does this water that's still from the yogic perspectives effects be.
Oh dear, there's so much more, and I feel the time already pressing. But I let's say that anything that is repressed and suppressed either can take you to being stressed or being depressed very, very quickly. And that would be like the two polarities of being active and relaxed. Being active becomes stressed, and being relaxed becomes depressed. But they are both as a result of something that is repressed and suppressed, like you were saying. It's just like a play on words. But um, I don't know how far can we take this. I'm trying to check how deep can we go. But I wanted to point something up that
So as deep
you
as
were
we want today, I think it's a
yeah,
really important topic. Everything that we do in psychology is about emotion.
yeah. There was something you pointed out, two steps of what we understand that these are like a three steps formula that is fundamental to healing the wounds of the past. And if we want to, okay, at the end of the day, if you want to start this spiritual path in some way, the first step you have to give is forgiveness. This is something that we say. The first step is forgiveness. Because if we look at the world and our lives and our position in the world through the eyes of the victim or the eyes of the guilty, then everything that we do is going to be tainted by that. And therefore, you may contact your innocence and you end up being naive. You contact your humility and you end up humiliated. And you try to be in service and you end up being servile, right? So there is all these incredible virtues that as we try to grow them in us, we quickly fall into the viruses if we haven't dealt with this fundamental issue of these mind games that we play in us. And that at the top of the pyramid of the mind games, there is this aspect of feeling guilty for having done something that you think is wrong, or feeling victim because something was done wrong to you. And so there needs a forgiveness for the others or forgiveness for yourself. Whatever the experience in the past that is blocked and suppressed, and I'm suppressing the emotions that are linked to that experience, will generally be, most of the time you can reduce it to these two, and therefore there is a need for forgiveness. Well, if there is a need for forgiveness, what is the path towards forgiveness? And that's what I'm saying. Maybe we should do a whole podcast on forgiveness. But there is, like very, very quickly, there is 3 steps that are involved in this forgiveness. That's recognize, accept, and agree. And we just talked about recognize is about the consciousness. And you were mentioning how the emotion that is subconscious or unconscious and is not noticed, and we are repressing them, even by the fact that we are not noticing it, needs to be aware. We need to recognize what it was. We need to recognize what it is. We need to recognize how we feel. We need to recognize what happened. So recognition, which means consciousness, that's the first step. And acceptance is the second. Now, if and you were just going into acceptance now with the last thing that you were saying, accepting how we feel. First of all, if we are trying to repress it or ignore it, that's not going to work, because that means there's a part of me that I'm not accepting. And the same is going to be from the perspective of the therapist. As you have a client in front of you, if you cannot accept as they are going to know it. So a part of them is going to know that you're not accepting them, no? So that acceptance has to be there. And the third step, that's, I'm not going to say the hardest, because every step can be hard. And for some situations, ones will be easier than others. But the third is agreeing. To agree that that had to happen in some way for me to be where I am today. Now, that's going to be extremely tough if somebody doesn't like where they are, right? Which is the case for many people who go to therapy specifically. I don't like who I am. I don't like where I am in my life. How can I accept what happened to me that brought me here? And the paradox is that, well, unless you have acceptance and agreement that had to happen, you cannot move on, because you keep feeling guilty, or keep at the shame that goes with guilt, or you keep feeling victim or guilt. They actually both go hand in hand. It's much more complex if I just I'm saying it very quickly, but it's a bit more complex. But they go hand in hand. And if we don't go through the process of forgiveness, then they are going to be sabotaging our progress. And yet, how can you agree if you haven't learned the lesson? And the thing is, what lesson? What is the lesson for that child who is not loved, who has a horrible experience as a little boy, and he's coming to you now and feeling nobody loves me? What lesson is there to be learned, right? So that's very tricky, and we cannot just say to them, you have to agree, you have to forgive, because that would be not compassionate, right? We are just talking on a different level. We are not talking directly to somebody who is in that position. But coming from this understanding and with the compassion that you are talking about, without that compassion, it wouldn't work. But with that compassion, can we guide the person towards getting something out of that, getting some gift out of everything that they suffered? There is something that they can get, even if it's just the fact that they are still alive and they managed to survive in spite of, against all odds, against everything that happened to them. They are alive. There's got to be a lot of grit and courage and strength and amazing value that they got, of themselves to be able to survive. They are warriors. Some people are, they've gone through hell, but they are still here in the planet. And maybe they are thinking nasty things and dark things, but you know what? They are still here and they've gone through all that. So just to be able to recognize that and give it value, that can be like the jewel enough to say, you know what? Now focus on that. Get on that courage. Don't go there anymore. You got the courage. Okay, now stay with the courage, no? And that can be useful to give that third step. So that's a whole path. It's a whole science, I would say, forgiveness. But it would mean that if you give the three steps, one more thing. If you give these three steps, and by the way, these three steps, the mind has to be super involved. So it has to be a lot of a process that you do in the mind. So even though it's also emotional, but it's happening in the mind. So when you help the other person's mind go through the whole process, the sign that they came out the other way is if they can feel gratitude. So when you feel somebody giving thanks for whatever happened, for whatever is going on, for whatever their parents there made them go through, no matter how tough it was, I can thank everyone who was involved in my challenges for what I learned. And if it's like a sincere thanks, that's a sign that they can come down to the heart and feel gratitude. Then you can feel that they've completed something. That's the sign that the healing has been complete in some way. And I'm not saying this is easy, and I can understand this could be tremendously difficult. It could be a challenge for life. You can be spending the whole life struggling with this. But I think that just having this map, just knowing these steps, at least from the yogic perspective, just knowing that there are these steps to give, it's already helping because you know where you are going. And then you know where you are, and maybe you know what's the challenge. Maybe it's challenging for me to accept what happened. Okay, but at least I know where I am, right? Otherwise, you are just lost. You feel terrible, that you are suppressing all these emotions. There's uh, uh, hell is in your life because of these suppressed emotions. When you go into a relationship with anyone, you throw all your garbage onto them. Anything they say to you, interpret it through that light. So you go into fights and you think it's a war. That's horrible. But if at least well, this is where I am. This is what I want to get to. I want to get to forgiveness, to myself, to the others, to everyone, to everything. Okay, what the steps do I have to give? Can I start walking that path? That's already going to be massively ahead than when somebody's fully lost in that drama.
Wow, forgiveness is a really big topic and definitely a part of the journey. But it's not as therapists as it's not. We don't have an agenda. It's the person's journey, and we're supporting them in compassion and wherever it needs to go, acknowledged validation. Um, but yeah, the gift of forgiveness and eventually able to see it with gratitude is a very powerful experience of the healing journey. Because then that's truly when you show up unburdened and more open to life without the interpretation of past experiences, still holding on to those emotions. And like you said, they show up in different areas of our life that then begin to see the impact of unresolved emotions within us. And when I used to study Buddhism at one time, it says that your outer life is just a reflection of your inner world, right? And that if the conflict is within, the conflict is without. And so where is the conflict within? Where is something unresolved within? And that's really the journey of exploration, self-discovery, self-inquiry, compassionate inquiry, and to be able to live with emotions being okay, safe. It's okay to be vulnerable, and still be ourselves, and still be able to express them and hold space in relationships and a space of safety in the world in expressing who I am in my uniqueness as well, apart from the hold of of the perception. I think there's so much that can be talked about in this, especially the interpretations of karma, but all of that we have coming up in our future podcast. But having said that, we do want to do one on forgiveness at some point, Ardasji.
Fair enough.
Um, so with that, I thank you so much for explaining those three steps and the containment and expression of emotions. Thank you so much.
I would say all this, whatever is your memory, whatever is the thing that you are holding on to and you feel trapped, I would say 99.999% you will find that there is something not forgiven
Mm,
behind that. And if you can forgive that, that may be the key to unlock everything. So if you can look at your experience and reflect, okay, what is not resolved in my life? And check, is there something or someone that can be forgiven here?
mm.
I would say that most of the time you're going to find out that there is something not forgiven yet. So that's fundamental.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's such
Yeah.
a wonderful space to I think pause and reflect on what is it that we're feeling and where might we have not forgiven
Let me
someone.
let me let me just say one more thing before
Yeah,
we
of
pause.
course.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just having the feeling that we haven't completed the journey because after you go through that and you manage to get to the forgiveness, the emotion that can happen then, it's a pure emotion.
Mm,
So emotion is energy in motion. And I said the water is, there's nothing wrong with the water, is what it carries. But the moment that you forgive and you clean all the toxicity that is carried within that emotion, within that water, the water by itself can be pure. And so you can connect to fire, which, a lot of people struggle with anger. Fire can be the passion to move mountains. You can be, your whole zeal and, you are devoted and committed and you put a lot of energy and passion to what you do can come from this fire. And particularly water and sadness. Some people go into depression and there's a lot of, it's like a black hole. But if you have gone through the process of the forgiveness and you clean the toxicity within that water, sadness is the fuel to devotion. We say from emotion to devotion. And when we hear the words of some gurus and or saints, when you hear their writings, they are crying very often.
mm,
They are tears, and not necessarily tears of joy. They are tears of sadness. So you can see how they've pulled together all their sadness, but it's pure. It's not directed, I'm sad because he did that to me. No, it's just pure sad. I'm sad, right? The very experience that we talked about in the last podcast, that sometimes we, not sometimes, in most of the times, in general, we feel disconnected from the soul and disconnected from God. That's a sadness. Just
mm,
by itself, that's already a sadness because you are separate. So if you can tune into that sadness without tainting it and putting a story and a narrative behind, that sadness can be your fuel to meditate. Yeah, it's
mm,
because I'm sad that I'm meditating today, and can be the fuel for the devotion. So we say that emotion to devotion, from
mm,
passion to compassion, and the transformation of that, something lower, physically, even in the body, to something higher. Some energy that is low and stuck below the diaphragm, breathe it and move it and clean it, and so that you can raise it and it can be the energy that is going to fuel your meditation. So there's something very, very beautiful about emotions when they have been purified, and and forgiveness is an fundamental, I would say, a fundamental step of that purification. And I think that's going to make today's more complete.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think in if I were to see the parallel, and I will complete it from the psychology perspective as
Yes,
well,
please.
is that is the journey that the more we begin to feel the emotions, you're creating more space for openness and expansion within the body as well, and therefore the mind's perception to perceive possibilities and individuals without the filters of perception, without the filters of pain, and then you're actually able to really feel into your wholeness and your completeness and your ability to fully love and able to see, oh, is this a manipulation of the mind, is this, and you're able to build that with more compassion and consciousness, and then you show up in the world more conscious. You become more conscious of your word, You become more
Mm.
conscious of the expression of that and where it's coming from. And that is eventually the journey, that it comes without those baggages that I'm carrying. It's sort of unburdening that, the layers that I've put on myself to live, more defended, to show up in my wholeness and my completion, to able to meet you in your wholeness and completion.
Mm.
uh, so I see the complete parallels of the experience in its totality. As thank you for completing it,
Thank you
Ardaas.
too. It's
Me
nice
too.
to bring both sides, yeah, and connect it.
Yeah. And it's beautiful because today is the ninth day of Navratri, which is moving us towards completion. Tomorrow is the 10th day, which is about completion. So completion of the journey from darkness to light. So from emotion to devotion, So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Ardash. Uh,
Satseva. And
Thank you.
thank you everyone who is watching. And if you enjoy this, please share it with others.
And please join us next week, same time, 5:30
Yes.
p.m. India, 1 p.m. Portugal.
Feel free to drop by and ask a question or share with us and participate in this discussion with us live.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.